I am Debbie, this is Melissa, and our preferred gender pronouns are she and her. Melissa and I are representing the group that was born in the 70s, raised mostly in the 80s. Melissa was raised mostly in Chicago and in Jackson, Mississippi. I was raised in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee. I was raised Presbyterian, and she was raised Catholic. Both of our families expected we would marry men when we were grown, and we both knew, Melissa at a young age and I as a teenager, that their expectations were not what we wanted for our lives. She and I met when we were 19 years old in 1995, and we knew that this relationship was unlike any other that we had had in the past. We went to college together in Atlanta in the mid-90s, and our first coming out experience was there. We were very supported by our peers. We had several friends that identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender at the time. We had a safe space there as young adults. We were very lucky to be in that environment, both in the college and also in the city of Atlanta, while we navigated transitioning into adulthood. Coming out to our families was a bit more of a challenge. Our parents were surprised, but our siblings not quite as much. It did take time for our parents to come to terms with our news, but they were very supportive of us as a couple, especially Melissa's parents. The month before we left Atlanta, Ellen DeGeneres publicly came out on her TV show and on the cover of Time magazine. And at that time, we felt waves of shock and gratitude, fear and anxiety, as we left our safe little environment in Atlanta and headed for the outside world. After we left Atlanta, we lived together for 6 years in South Florida while Melissa worked on her master's degree and I went to nursing school. We were here through 2003, and while we were here, we encountered very little overt discrimination based on our sexuality. In Atlanta and South Florida, we were definitely surrounded by more accepting friends and coworkers than we remembered and we expected in the Midwest and in the rest of the South. So when the time came for us to go to Indiana for Melissa's doctorate, we were a little apprehensive. Would we experience more discrimination based on our orientation in a small town in Indiana in 2003? While we were there, we did have a few uncomfortable situations with people who were not accepting, but overall, I found that I was met more with curiosity than unkindness. It was interesting and sometimes humorous how many people had questions about our legal rights and our family plans. But most of the time I was happy to answer their questions. I wanted to represent LGBTQ people in a positive and in a real way. We made many close long-term friends while we were there, and they loved us as family and accepted us completely. During our time in Indiana, we started planning to have children. Through our entire relationship, we had agreed that we would like to have children in the future, whether we physically carried them or through adoption. We did try for 4 years to get pregnant with our doctor's assistants, and with the exception of a miscarriage, we didn't succeed during that time. But we didn't feel we were missing out on having a family or being a family. Though we weren't able to have children at that time, we still recognized that we as a couple were a family. We were very thankful and content with our lives together, whether we were blessed with children or not. We also asked ourselves during this time how others would treat our children in the world. We did worry that they would be bullied for having lesbian parents. While knowing that we can't control everything, as well as realizing that difficulties are an important part of growing up, we also didn't want to be the reason that our children experienced those challenges. We hesitated to raise them in the Midwest, even though we had had mostly positive experiences. We had hoped to raise our future children in a more liberal part of the country and near our family. So when Melissa went on the job market after finishing her doctorate, we were thrilled that she found work back in South Florida. We moved back to South Florida and decided to do IVF, and we were incredibly successful with our first attempt, and Emmy and Everett were born in October 2011, just 2 months after our 16th anniversary of being together.
In 2015, we legally married, surrounded by friends, family, and most importantly, Emmy and Everett. It was a rather surreal time for me. We had been together for almost 20 years, and were finally able to get married. I vividly remember going through the process of getting the marriage license. The first time we went, it was the official day that you could go, but the computer system was conveniently down that day. There was another couple there, 2 men in their 50s, patiently waiting for the computers to come back online. We decided that we would leave and return the next day because we had Emmy and Everett, and they were 3 at the time. We were able to get the marriage license the next day after a slightly uncomfortable moment of having to put my name in the husband section of the form, since the documents had not been updated yet. I will admit that being legally married feels different. I know that many people see marriage as just a document, but for me it does feel different. And it's difficult for me to explain that. It is also something that is difficult to explain to Emmy and Everett. The fact that we live in a world that has a say in the most intimate aspects of our personhood. As much as I would like to believe that I have control over my own life, it still requires external validation in the form of these documents. These documents give me spousal rights, health and car insurance, and a say in my children's lives. And all of this is beautifully frustrating. It's beautiful because I doubted whether I would have these rights, and frustrating because it's just absurd. I have known since I was 5 that I was gay. I knew the moment that I met Debbie almost 25 years ago in the admissions office at Belhaven College that she was my future. The rest of the world learned I was gay in 1995 when I began telling others. The truth is, though, is that I never stopped coming out. Every time I meet someone and they ask about my life, I come out, as I proudly talk about my wife and children. I am proud of who I am and my family. I am blessed with an amazing wife who is the epitome of a gentle soul, and 2 children who help me to see all that is good and right in the world. I am also blessed to be in this River of Grass community who choose acceptance, not simply tolerance, and do more than just welcome others. You embrace them.
Good morning. My name is Margie, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm representing the 60s decade, so there's a lot to unpack there. Wow, it's a weird place to be, 6 decades of life, 2 of them as a UU here at the river. So to take you through my wild and precious life, I'll share some highlights of each decade with some of the ups and downs of each one. So from birth to 10 years of age, starting in 1958. My decade of joy is what I call this. I was born the youngest of 3 children. The oldest was my brother Larry, and the middle was my sister Cheryl. My dad was a major appliance salesperson, and my mom, once I was in school, worked as a nurse part-time. We spent lots of time together as a family. We were all very active in our Episcopal church programs and attended services together as a family every Sunday. I never gave a second thought to who I was or where I belonged. I was an exuberant, talkative, active, imaginative, and fearless young extrovert. Well, almost fearless. The only thing I was afraid of was the dark. Okay, and spiders. I could catch frogs, snakes, worms, all kinds of insects and wild things, but spiders, they kept me awake at night. Still, I had a really happy childhood and a very loving and supportive home environment. From 11 to 21 years of age, my decade of turmoil. This was when, according to society's rules, I was supposed to stop playing like a boy and start liking boys. Uh-oh. I had already started to both feel and test the waters of female attractions. I had these feelings, but I didn't want or understand them. I knew deep down that I was different. Eventually, I started to self-identify as gay and was bullied in school. At 17, I came out to my family. My mom fainted. And my dad struggled with what he believed the Bible said. I watched them struggle with why. Was it because I almost died from spinal meningitis as a toddler? Was it because of the concussions I got as a kid falling out of trees and off bicycles? One day, I overheard my dad in a conversation with my mom say she just needs to find the right boy and all will be fine. So, I embarked on a search for the right boy. This led to intense inner turmoil and a total loss of self-esteem. I changed from who I was to who I was supposed to be, and nothing felt right. I lost good friends, I hated myself, and I wanted to die. Thankfully, there was a teacher that I respected who believed in the real me, and the psychologist I was sent to told me that I was fine just as I was and that my parents would adjust eventually. Still, I was torn, and it hurt to see my parents in distress because of me. My continued search for the right boy resulted in a failed hetero marriage. Well, kind of hetero. I married a boyfriend who was also struggling with being gay. At 18, we decided to not be gay together, and we got married. That short, 1-month marriage resulted in my having a bouncing baby boy at 19 years old. I went on welfare and quickly learned that my son could be taken away if the state found out I was a lesbian. From 22 to 32 years of age, I call this my decade of duality and resilience. My focus these years was to be the best mother ever, since my parents were horrified that I would even consider raising my baby without a mother and a father. Raising a child as a lesbian would not be fair to the child, they said. But I knew I would be a great mom, even if I had to hide being gay, keep it closeted. As a result, my extroverted nature became buried in the safety of introversion, used as a protective shield. My focus was on single parenting, since my ex-husband was no longer in the picture. During this decade, Philip, my son, grew from 3 to 13 years old. In my determination to succeed as a mom and be self-supporting, I earned a technical certificate in computer electronics, landed a good job, and got off government assistance by the time Philip was in first grade. Looking for some adult level of connection, I discovered the gay bars. I found them to be very scary. However, they did lead me into a few relationship test drives. My parents finally came around to full acceptance and support. However, my brother, the evangelical Christian, disowned me, and my sister was supportive but mired in her own life dramas, so we simply grew apart. From 33 to 43 years of age, it was my decade of rediscovery and self-worth. This was my decade of growth. I opened my own successful computer business. I discovered Unitarian Universalism, and when Philip started college, I sold my business and moved to Florida. It was here in Florida that I started to live more openly as a lesbian. I joined my beloved community, River of Grass, and at 43 years of age, finally met the love of my life, Esther. From 44 to 54 years of age, my journey back to joy. I left corporate America and started working in academia. I went back to school and earned a master's degree. There was definitely no more closet living for me. I was out and proud in both my personal life and in my professional life. I now saw the world in new ways, and I started to let my guard down and make more friends. My family had expanded with 2 more kids to love, Ralph and Donna, and although they were already young adults in college, I got to experience their launch into adulthood and careers. Soon after, Esther and I experienced the joy of having our first grandchild, Matthew. From 55 to 61 years of age and beyond, my decade of reflection and gratitude. Just when we thought that Matthew would be our only grandchild, we were surprised with 2 more, Cordelia and Emily. We have traveled a lot these past few years to visit our kids and our grandchild that lives far away, but also to follow a spirit of adventure. What I have learned during these past 6 decades is that no matter what your age, life is always a work in progress, and you should never lose sight of your authentic self. I'm still humbled by life's lessons, awed by beauty and kindness, and realize that nothing stays the same, and that's a good thing. Though I've tried to shed it, I can at times still feel that shield of introversion that has never completely fallen away. Feeling socially exposed can still be uncomfortable for me. But overall, I'm grateful for the path that has led me to the here and now and to this wonderful River of Grass family. I look forward to the decade ahead that will offer retirement with Esther, and who is still the love of my life, who I have since been able to marry legally. And she'll be by my side to explore new and exciting adventures in this wild and precious life we share. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rita Cherubini, and my pronouns are she and her. I was born in 1943, and I represent the decade of the 70s. Everyone knew me as a single mother with 4 young children when I was in the workplace. I was accepted by my colleagues as someone rising in the ranks due to the fact that I was single and had responsibilities, just like the men on the fast track. So they kind of took me along in their sphere. It was a strange road. I admired those men. I worked with them and their adeptness at their jobs, and I even tried to emulate them. But the women who stood out really exemplified true admiration. They hadn't been groomed for anything, but they became everything. I never saw them as any more than competent. I just admired them. At least that's what I thought. It was during the end of my second marriage to 2 abusive men that I was attending my first UU church, First Church Unitarian in Littleton, Massachusetts. Fred Small was the minister, and he wrote the music that Gary Gonzalez sang this morning, Everything Possible. It was there that I experienced being on the Welcoming Congregation Committee and are introducing the concept of being truly welcoming to the GBLT community. Of course, I didn't know anything about that. In the process, our committee took about 6 different classes that would eventually bring to the congregation. But we first had to discover our own biases, of which we thought we had none. It was during this time that I uncovered who I really was, with a little therapy. I was a gay woman, living in a straight world, never understanding the difference or the sameness until the conversations of discovery. My upbringing told me who I was, and there was no room for my soul to express that dissatisfaction. I told everyone in that church, personally, who I was now. I was excited, and they were truly accepting. We did all the things that couples did. She wooed me with flowers, candlelight, moonlight walks, and we cooked dinners together, and we loved the ocean together. We talked for hours, but it was also a scary time. Excuse me. The physical aspects of loving a woman were overwhelming to me. But she was a gentle teacher, and I wanted to learn. So in those periods of learning, I planned to meet with each of my 4 children, 2 sons, 2 daughters, separately over drinks. I planned it so well, at their homes or in a restaurant. I was 50. You know, the typical family conversation. All of the locations were different, and I must say, they all treated the news with amazing acceptance. My children were not UUs, but I did teach them tolerance and kindness, and they shared it back with me in my nervous yet loving confession of what love meant to me now. My youngest son, Christopher, and daughter-in-law, Amy, heard the news in my grandson Nick's bedroom as I rolled the ball back and forth to him. Amy hugged me, both saying they were so happy for me, and who I loved made no difference to them, as long as I was happy. Then there was Tim, my first child, my closest confidant. We met at Bertucci's after work, and after a few minutes of chit-chat, his work, my work, I told him, I'm in love. Really, he said. Yes, I replied, with a woman. He hesitated. The silence was deafening. Well, Mom, I need to tell you something. I'm gay.
His eyes looked straight into mine. I hesitated. The silence was deafening. I knew that, I said. When did you know that? When you were 2. And I did. I knew that there was something different about him. And we held hands across the table in a true understanding of our differences, and yet how much the same we were. 20 years apart we were, setting our truth straight, finally. Stephanie and Bridget were both the loving women I hoped they would be, and they all welcomed my first true love into our new family. She had been gay all her life, and of course I was so excited to tell everyone about my news that she practically hid under the pews because she just found it so difficult to be as open as I was. So we bought a house together. We held the Christmases and birthdays for the children and the grandchildren, all babies then. So what was it like to discover my truth? First, I told the people who loved me. I told myself I was loved. I was willing to hold myself back from telling those who could be judgmental. Many late discovering people like me have had those traditional upbringings where truth or choice is not acceptable to family or workplace or church. You have 4 children. How can you be gay? I happened to come out at a time of liberation in many ways. Women in the workplace, abortion rights, gay marriage. Both my parents were deceased. Would they have accepted me? I'm glad I didn't have the opportunity to know. It was 1993, and I chose not to tell my aunts and cousins who I now was. I was just too euphoric to let negative discussion get in my way. My church and my children were the only family I wanted. The present, the most important ones. They mattered. I didn't have to explain anything. They wanted the best for me. And my workplace friends, I've kept in touch with them. My childhood friends I still see. Well, perhaps they have their suspicions. I don't hide anything, but none of it is important to me. I have no scarlet letter on my chest. I am just me, the woman I was meant to be. What would have happened if I hadn't been a UU and hadn't said yes to that welcoming congregation invitation? Would that closet door remain closed? All I know is when any road that's clear and without obstacles, it is meant to be my road. When I was 50, I said I had 50 years left. Well, 26 of those have already passed, and I'm grateful that my wild and precious life still has no end in sight. Thank you.
My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I have a double coming out story. My first coming out was when I was in college, and my second coming out was in 1992. The first was quite traumatic, the second one, joyous. In high school, I knew I was different. My friends started talking about girls. Now, this was the 1950s. Everyone appeared hetero. I certainly did not know any gay people in high school. If there were any, they were in the closet, just like me. Now I'm going to intertwine another thread in my story. Most of you here come from a different faith tradition. I am one of the lucky ones, because I was born a Unitarian. I grew up in the Winchester Unitarian Society, just outside of Boston, and I have many warm, fuzzy memories of that church. It was a building built of stone, with a carillon in the tower, on Main Street between the high school and downtown. The inside had wooden Gothic arches in the ceiling, stained glass windows, and wooden pews. There was a large choir with paid soloists and an organ. There was a plain gold cross on the altar. But the chalice and the seven principles arrived much later. The statement of faith talked about the unity of God, the teachings of Jesus, salvation by character, and the progress of mankind upward. We had readings from the Bible. Now, I left the church when I went away to college. I tried to date girls in college, but I was wrestling with who I am. I was conflicted. I was compelled to tell my father I was gay. Now, I was unable to do it face to face, so I wrote him a letter. I found out later that when he read my letter, his face became ashen. He went upstairs and vanished into his bedroom. He stayed there for several hours. My parents must have thought I was contagious, for they did their best to keep me separated from my younger brother. It was several years later that we discovered we were both gay. We became quite close, and he now lives with his partner of 40 years, Jake, in Savannah. They got married about 4 years ago. In 1963, I moved to Gainesville to attend graduate school in psychology. I flunked out after one semester and started work as a research chemist. I started seeing a psychiatrist. I came out and joined gay society by going to a bar that became gay after midnight. I started to paint, and I started to paint, quit being a research chemist, and went to the University of Florida and studied art for 2 years. I loved it. That's when I met Louis. We formed a relationship. We lived together. He went with me when I went to Ann Arbor to study art for 2 more years. In 1974, we moved to Fort Lauderdale so I could teach art. Although we owned a house together, we started to do our own thing. In 1990, he was murdered. My intense mourning drove me to a grief counselor, and I needed a family. So I went back to the church of my childhood. I was quite wounded when I started going to the UU Church of Fort Lauderdale. To my delight, the liturgy had changed dramatically from a Winchester Unitarian Society, becoming much more humanist. I received support from people that are with us today, like Kip and Christine, and Deb, and John. In my therapy, I started to explore my feelings about women, for I did not see many gay relationships that were as loving as the hetero and lesbian relationships that I knew. I became quite active in the church. The board sent me to leadership school in 1992. It was in that intense, supportive, transforming, week-long experience that I started to think about being bisexual. This was my second coming out, which is a very joyous one. Now, Kathy, she arrived at UUCFL in 1994. We started dating. She is an amazing woman, for she accepted me as I am. She had no desire to change me. Our love is incredible. We were married in 1997. Our life since then has been joyous. I never would have thought 30 years ago that I would have grandchildren. Wow, what a reward. Where will my wild and precious life lead me? 20 years from now, when my grandkids look at me and say, "What did you do, Grandpa Toole, when you first found out about global warming?" I will be able to say that I'm proud of what I did, both in advocacy and what I did to lower my carbon footprint.